Within the ancient forests of Northland, New Zealand's mighty kauri trees such as Tane Mahuta still stand. Estimated to be over 2,000 years old, Tane Mahuta is a spiritual and historical icon. The kauri is famous for its immense size. It's the second largest tree in the world, second only to the United States sequoia. The kauri is renowned for its beautiful, versatile timber and for Cody Gum, which is the resin that bleeds from the trees. The kauri industry began in the late 1700s, when young kauri trunks were used for masts and spars of sailing ships. This was the birth of one of the most important periods in New Zealand history. The lure of this magnificent tree continues today. An hour and a half north of Auckland, nestled on the Kaipara Harbour, is Matakohe, home to the world-famous and internationally acclaimed Kauri Museum. Here you can learn fascinating stories of pioneering settlers and experience real New Zealand heritage.
I'm Betty Nelly, CEO of the Kauri Museum at Matakohe. The museum started in 1962 under the leadership of Mervyn Sterling and a group of very enthusiastic volunteers. The museum tells the story of the early settlers through the theme of the mighty kauri tree. The kauri timber industry and the Kauri gum industry were very important in the colonisation of this nation.
The Smith Wing houses impressive displays from the pioneering past. From immense kauri logs and displays of original equipment for felling trees, transporting logs, milling timber, and collecting Cody Gum. This part of the museum shows hands-on experience of real equipment and immense kauri logs. The traditional art of pit sawing was brought to New Zealand as early as 1790. This back-breaking method was used to establish dams and bush huts up until the 1920s. Other displays include the blacksmith's workshop, a Nico gum digger's hut, and other pioneering memorabilia. The dense New Zealand bush made going tough for the kauri loggers, and by far their best tool for the job was a team of bullocks.
The influence that bullocks had here in the north in New Zealand in the early pioneering days was enormous. The bullock team that arrived in 1821 on the boat the Dromedary that came from Australia was sent here to collect kauri spars for the Royal Navy. That team of bullocks established themselves as being eminently suitable for the uneven conditions and the muddy underfoot conditions here in the north.
Bullock teams governed the transport of kauri logs from the 1850s until the advent of steam in the 1930s. However, their legacy lives on. Millions of kauri trees were felled during the industry's heyday, and an ingenious method was developed to transport them. Dams were built to hold back thousands of tons of timber and water, and then burst, flooding the forest and sending the logs to waterways. From there they were barged or towed to mills. A model dam's on display in the Smith Wing of the museum. The first sawmills were established in the late 1830s, and soon there were numerous sawmills around the sheltered harbours of Northland. These mills, powered by water and later steam engines, had far greater cutting power than the pit saws. The museum's reconstructed an operational steam mill. Originally from Hawke's Bay, it demonstrates how logs were turned into timber using saws, flat belts, countershafts and a steam engine. This exhibit demonstrates the dramatic change in the technology used by Kauri loggers. By the 1860s, the hunt was on to find buried treasure, the solidified resin from the Cody trees, better known as Cody Gum. The work was long and hard, as most of the gum harvested had been buried in the ground or in swamps for thousands of years. Some diggers climbed trees with spiked boots to collect the gum from the high branches. Later, to accelerate the rate of gum flow, trees were bled by cutting holes in the bark. This controversial practice was banned in 1905 due to the damage caused to the trees. For 50 years, the Kauri gum industry was the major source of income for settlers north of Auckland. It was primarily used for making varnish. At the peak of the industry, over 10,000 tonnes of Kauri gum was exported. The Kauri Museum proudly displays the largest and most beautiful collection of Kauri gum in the world. Often, when the gum diggers were scraping their gum for buyers, special pieces were kept aside for polishing or carving. It was a fascination to know what one might find in the gum once it was polished. Many of these old collections are now part of the display at the Kauri Museum. Some pieces include insects caught in the gum and preserved for thousands of years. Community support for the Kauri Museum is very strong. Every Wednesday, dedicated engine enthusiasts volunteer their time to restore the numerous working machines.
This part of the museum contains the operational machinery which has been recovered from paddocks and cow sheds all around the district. It was in poor condition when we got it, and we have spent many hours restoring it to the running condition that nearly all of it is in now. And on occasions we do run them one or two at a time for the visitors to see.
Displays in the operational machinery hall depict the changing times in the Kauri country. Here you'll find the tools which mechanised the old Kauri timber and gum industries. This Caterpillar 60 was built in 1929 and was later to be responsible for replacing the bullock teams in the bush around Northland. There were only 4 of them that came into New Zealand, and this is one of only 2 believed to be still running. It was virtually the end of an era as far as the bullock teams were concerned, because machines like this replaced them. They could stand in one place and just winch the Kauri logs up the hills. And when the logs were on a reasonable sort of slope, the tractor could pull them quite freely through the bush itself. The Automatair boarding house is a 2-storied life-size replica based on the old boarding houses of the Kaipara district. As villages sprang up and commerce took hold, boarding houses became a necessary feature of the landscape. They accommodated the traders, gum buyers, land surveyors, bankers, travelling salesmen, dentists and shearers. The Mid-North could only be accessed easily by boat, so everyone stayed a night or two at a boarding house while waiting for boats. Each room in the boarding house is populated with antique furniture and lifelike mannequins telling their own particular story of how they came to be staying at the boarding house. Church was a major part of the early pioneer settlers' lives, and the wooden church across the road from the Kauri Museum was built of kauri in 1867 as a non-denominational meeting place used mainly by Anglicans and Methodists, and it's been lovingly cared for and is still used on special occasions. The old Matakohi Post and Telegraph Office next to the Kauri Museum has been restored to demonstrate the role of the country post office. From 1909 till 1988, the post office was a vital centre for the Matakohi community. It offered postal, banking and provided communication with the outside world. The telephone exchange, which depicts how the isolated farms were linked with their neighbours and the world beyond. The display features models and accurate examples of original equipment. Matakohi's original school building gives a great glimpse of early education in New Zealand, offering old and young a unique insight into the past. Established in 1878, the school was complete with desks, pens, books and maps, revealing a glimpse of early education in New Zealand. I think the early pioneers that came to this district indeed had a very hard time. At first they had to just survive. But having gone through the hard times, they built beautiful kauri houses and kauri furniture. This is depicted in the Stirling wing of the museum. As you enter the wing, you feel as though you're in a time capsule. The Stirling wing shows a fascinating recreation of a quality colonial six-room home circa 1900, fully furnished with original decor and full of authenticity, from the antique furniture and ornaments to the kauri-lined floors, walls and fittings. Lifelike mannequins are exquisitely dressed in period costume. Modelled on descendants of early settlers, the mannequins bring these rooms to life. This part of the museum's display is typical of how kauri was used for building homes and for making beautiful furniture. Keep an eye on the mannequins. Occasionally, you may see more than you expect. Prized for its beautiful timber, kauri has been extensively used for furniture. Timber from the trunk is stable and straight-grained. Figured wood from the heads and mottled trees provide panels which have striking features.
The museum is involved with scientists from around the world, unlocking the secrets from the past by looking at the ancient kauri being dug from the Northland swamps today.
Swamp kauri refers to prehistoric kauri forest. According to carbon dating, these logs have been buried for up to 50,000 years. In some logs, natural stains have produced rich, dark brown and greenish hues, which emphasize the beautiful figure in the grain, making swamp kauri popular for wood turning. The museum offers a cultural outlet for local artists. Adorning the walls are murals depicting scenes of pioneer lifestyle. Kauri's been beautifully crafted into sculptures, ornate panels and bowls, all exhibited within the museum.
The Kauri Museum is administered by a charitable trust. It is very much a community museum and has many volunteers.
The largest selection of Cody products in New Zealand can be found in the museum shop. Here you'll find an extensive range of gifts, crafts and souvenirs, and all proceeds fund the continuation of the Kauri Museum. The museum aims not only to enlighten its visitors about the pioneering past, but also to educate for the future by raising awareness of conservation programs to preserve the remaining Kauri forests for future generations. The Kauri Museum, New Zealand heritage at its best.